Hi, everybody. I'm Catharine Dockery, the founder of Vice Ventures. I'm so excited to be recording this, and I wanted to give you a little bit of the story of how I got here. So a lot of people probably don't know. I was born in the West Village before it was nice. My dad was a bartender at the Corner Bistro. I spent a lot of nights with him playing three card Monty. And for those of you not from New York, you should definitely Google it because it is a bananas game. But anyway, yeah, so I grew up with him mostly. My mom was a flight attendant. When it's funny, like when I was in high school, like both my parents didn't go to college. So they were like, oh, you should go to like a SUNY school or like a CUNY school. And they like didn't really understand the importance of a college education. So I kind of had to apply. This is horrible that I did this, but I applied directly to NYU early decision and forged my father's signature and went and found all of their tax documents to make sure that I would get financial aid. I haven't been a pain since the beginning of my life. And anyway, so then from there in college, I studied a combination of neuroscience and finance. And I spent basically the entirety of my college experience working on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, which honestly, like besides Vice Ventures, is probably the best job I ever had. I learned so much. They're so smart down there. I really wanted to be a trader at the time because for me, I had two uncles. One was an attorney for Nixon that wasn't incarcerated, and the other one was a bonds rating analyst and had like an executive position at Moody's. So every Christmas we would get together and we would all have like the same tree or whatever, and you'd put gifts under the tree. And every other of my cousins would get so many gifts. And I was just like, this is ridiculous. Like, why don't we have money? And then that's when I kind of realized. I was like, I want to be a trader. Like, I want to make money. That's like the best way to make money out of college. Like, that's what I'm doing. So when I was in college, I wrote a blog called Dockery's Daily Docket that I would start writing at 4:30 in the morning, and I'd get it out by 6 a.m., sometimes 6:15, but whatever. And basically what it was like a brief of what happened in Europe and Asia overnight, like where the futures were trading. But then it also had an op-ed piece where I wrote about behavioral finance, right? Like, so one example, I wrote that salmon trading, if you're trading salmon options on the fish pool, which is a real exchange, you're kind of fucked, right? If like the global warming like really affects the temperature of the Tango River, and then a lot of the fish are dying off, right? So like that's something I wrote about. I got my first job out of college using the blog basically because I had 5,000 users or readers basically of it, a lot of them from sell-side banks, some hedge funds, and then some academic groups at universities, including Harvard, which to me, I was like, you don't have anything interesting to read besides me? Flattering nonetheless. But then I got to the trading desk and I realized that I absolutely hated it. And it was the absolute worst job I've ever taken in the entirety of my life. They wanted me to show up at 6 in the morning. After like week 3, I was just like, this is inhumane. I'm not getting here at 6 in the morning and working till 8 o'clock at night. Like, I'll get here at 7:30 or 8. Like, I'm not doing that. And my managers were like, okay. Because like you can't argue with that, right? Like waking up at 6 a.m. is ridiculous. So anyway, I digress. So basically after my second bonus, I quit without a job. I hated it that much. I also didn't realize how like tone sensitive I am. So on a trading desk, like people are just screaming back and forth. And for me, I was like, oh my God, like every time somebody would scream. So anyway, so I quit. I moved in with my now husband. He bought a co-op and let me move in and not pay rent and like figure out what I wanted to do. Best decision I've ever made in my life was marrying him by far. And I had no idea. And so I started contracting for a ton of funds and like for hedge funds specifically, not venture funds. And I contracted for any job I could find in different fields to see like what I wanted to do exactly. And one of them was at a PR firm, which was super interesting. It like taught me a lot about media, but I didn't find it like a good fit for me at the time. So I was actually going to quit. And the day I was going to give notice I was quitting, because I was only working there 2 days a week and it was like week 2 or something. And I was like, this is not for me. Was one of the co-founders of Bonobos. After the meeting, he basically came up to me and was like, I want to hire you. And then we had just jammed so well together in like 2-hour session. I was like, I want to work for you too. So I went from there, that was my first exposure to venture. It had a portfolio of over 80 investments and a lot of like the biggest consumer brands that you think of today, like he was a seed investor of, which was awesome, right? Because one, like I saw the decks for all these companies, like I learned what made them interesting. I also was the point person for a lot of the founders in the portfolio. So I learned what a good founder looks like, questions to ask of a founder, like how to help somebody with marketing, which is like I obviously had no background in, but like had to figure that out, right? And I had to help a lot of these companies raise more capital and talk to other investors and blah blah blah. And I loved it. It was like one of the best jobs I've ever had by far. I had full autonomy over everything, and like I am a pretty autodidactic person, so for me, like learning a new field it's like super interesting to me, right? Like it's not something that's like a responsibility that like bears over my head. So basically went through this portfolio and figured out like if we invested in the seed round and now it's a series D, what are the shares worth? Like what is his portfolio worth? Why did this happen? Why didn't this happen? Like whatever. Fast forward 2 years-ish, I think, Walmart acquires Bonobos. The founder I was working for was no longer allowed to make private investments. So my job died. But he was like, no, Catherine, like, I really want to work with you continually. Like, why don't you join Walmart? And I was like, okay, like super excited because I wanted to follow him wherever he went. But Walmart, I mean, growing up in the city, I'd never been to a Walmart, right? So like this whole like mission driven Walmart culture was just so different from like anything I ever experienced ever. And like, not that that's bad. Like Walmart does a fantastic job of basically like selling goods that are super affordable to like all Americans so they can live like their best possible lives and not be like financially burdened. But I had a different mission than that, right? Like I like that's not something that excited me. But anyway, but what was interesting about the job is that it was an M&A position. So a lot of the companies that we invested in or we saw like early on, we were considering for M&A. So I saw this whole cycle, right, of like seed to acquisition. Like it was awesome. I learned so much. It was amazing. But unfortunately, it was not for me. So I basically told Andy Dunn, the Bonobos co-founder, that I wanted to leave. He was like, I support your decision. So I started interviewing at tons of consumer funds, tons of them. And a lot of them were like, oh, take a business or whatever. And I was like, hey, like I invested in this canned wine business. Like I think it's doing really well, like blah, blah, blah. And then almost unanimously, like all of these fund managers was like, we know like it's, the brand is great. Like they should be able to get great distribution, blah, blah, blah. And then they were like, but unfortunately, like we have this vice clause, which means we can't invest in it. And I heard that at least 40 times, like no joke. And then it just got to me and I was like, why? And they were like, well, because we have pensions or we have endowments and like they don't want it, like Harvard endowment doesn't want to invest in nicotine, right? Which you're like, okay, that actually like I understand that makes sense. But then it leaves this huge white space, right? Of no institutional capital that can come in at the seed stage for these vice businesses. So that's when I kind of got the thesis. The first investment I made was in Recess, which is a CBD sparkling water. And I helped them put the round together because it was so difficult. Like nobody could do it. Like a lot of people did it in SPVs. They couldn't do it out of their fund. And yeah, I just realized like Recess is doing extremely well. And it just proved the thesis true, right? That a lot of these really strong vice brands need help in the beginning. And it's a great investment as well, right? It's like you're growing with somebody and like you are also making money while they're making money. And like, I don't think you can possibly have a better relationship, right, with your founders. But anyway, so then I put the deck together with the strategy and everything. I started thinking, I was like, who is the richest people that I can think of? Like the richest and most powerful and most brilliant, like who do I want to align myself with in like best case scenario? And first thing that came to mind was Mark Andreessen. He's like a total genius, right? So I sent him an email in January or December. And he was like, Catherine, I love this, like CCing like two partners or whatever. He was like, can you come out in like late January? Like, is that too late? And I was like, oh my God. I was like, I can't believe this just happened. I'm like literally screaming when he responded. Yeah. And then basically from there, it wasn't like, he's so great. Right. So like anything that he invested in, like people also want to invest in because he's so smart. So I got super lucky that he was one of our first investors and like people just reach out left and right to invest, and it like opened up my world, right? But something that's also interesting is that after Mark Andreessen invested or committed to invest, hadn't signed yet, I was like, okay, like this cold email works. So like, I'm going to keep cold emailing. And I just begged people for email addresses. Like if I was connected with like the founder of like a big consumer company that we knew, I was like, hey, you know me, this is what I'm doing. This is what I want to achieve. Do you know anybody who would invest in a fund? And then they would connect me with like 5 or 6 people. And then those 5 or 6 people would connect me with other people. And then at the end of the day, I realized I had sent over 500 cold emails trying to make this fund work. And I'm super lucky that it got funding. I'm super lucky that it's doing so well. And the luckiest part about it, honestly, is that one, I had investors who believed in me and the thesis so much that they invested without me really having a track record. And two, our founders who make us as a fund look so much smarter than we actually are. Like Recess, genius, right? Like it's such a genius man. And I'm so super lucky that I was able to be with him. But anyway, I guess that's the story of coming from a 800 square foot apartment, hanging out at a bar, to sitting here in my lovely home with a very stocked bar over there. Yeah, so I'm super lucky and I'm very thankful for this opportunity as well. Thank you so much, Growth.